A lot of reels online, people are taking dal as a protein source and comparing it to chicken and saying that dal has so much more carbohydrates.
No, that's not a fair comparison. Why do you think carbohydrates are bad? We also have a very skewed idea about how much protein does the body require. Excess proteins, one, is converted to body fat. And second thing, excess protein is excess load on the kidneys. So it's not necessarily always healthy for you. When we are looking at like an egg, and people say that an egg is the most wholesome because it has all the nutrients, you're not looking at the other things. It's like saying that my urine is rich in a certain vitamin, so I should start my day with a glass of urine every morning.
Carnivore people that are only eating meat 24/7, how can they be healthy?
I don't think they're healthy. And we've also seen a lot of carnivore influencers online showing their blood work and saying, yes, the cholesterol is high, but that's okay. That's not okay. It's against what science says. Pulses have a fantastic quality. We call it the second meal effect. So let's say I'm having a bowl of pulses for morning, eat an ice cream, which is fat and sugar for lunch. My spike in insulin will still be lower because of the pulses I had in the morning.
Oh, wow. In our recent podcast with Masala Lad, he said that a lack of animal protein is causing children to be stunted.
Well, there's no research saying that. What about Asian places like Japan and China where people are short and eating a lot of meat?
Hey guys, welcome to Kindness with Amy. Today I'm joined by nutritionist Roshni Sanghvi. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I've been following you. I know my mom's a big fan of you, and she's going to be so excited that I'm here.
I'm so excited to have you. You are extremely well known for your diet
Thank you.
plans, which reverse PCOS, diabetes, and other diseases. And Roshni, I want to understand from a nutritionist's perspective, why did you decide to go vegan?
Oh, wow. So I think veganism for me, especially when I transitioned to a vegan diet, has always been about health. It was not about environment or ethics or really anything else. It was my personal health. Um, I was in the US and I was studying there, and I was in my last semester of my master's. So it was literally my dream job was a few months away from, and everything I'd worked for was a few months away from achieving. And I get a call from my mom saying that my dad was sick and he was hospitalized, and they wanted me to come back immediately. And this happened on a Friday evening. I remember it so clearly in my mind. And I asked her, okay, how long should I come back for? Let me pack accordingly. And she takes a pause and says, you're probably not going to be able to go back because he might not make it. And that was so scary, and especially for someone who's grown up in very protected Indian family. Um, I remember I did not even know how to go and cash my check in the bank because everything was like so protected, and you're always taken care of. You're not taught, and your father's everything. So I came back, and a lot of work was done in terms of his health, and touch wood, thankfully he's made it back, and he's done so well now. But that was the first time I started thinking about nutrition, and I wasn't able to find the right help with regard to nutrition. And I also came across the book, The China Study. So it's a
I've
really
read
old,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't even finished the whole book yet. I've read the first 100 pages, and that's really all you need to know. And the book was so interesting, where he's talking about how dairy is directly it's carcinogenic and it's so bad for the body. Um, and I started thinking about veganism then from a health perspective, that I should probably try to drop dairy or reduce dairy. But that wasn't enough to push me towards making the change. I had a trip later on to was it Hong Kong or China, but which is very, meat heavy. And as a vegetarian, the only options around me were cheese pizza, a lot of cheese pizza, and I over binge ate cheese pizza. And within a week, my skin was the worst it possibly could be. And I was like, okay, this is a good time. Let me take up a 1 week vegan challenge. Let's see if it starts improving
Mm.
my skin health. But not convinced enough that it's going to help me in terms of my overall health. I really was just looking at improving my skin health. And I was into bodybuilding. So I was doing a lot of lifting, and everyone in the gym was like, you shouldn't do this. It's not good for you. You're going to become weak. But for the first time in the span of that 7 days of taking up the vegan challenge, I wake up without soreness around my joints.
Wow.
And something that I thought was so normal that I did not even consider it a problem, because I was like, I'm lifting heavy weights and it's okay to be sore. and it's okay to have pain in your joints. You should not be having pain in your joints. And I did not reduce the intensity of my training, but I wake up and I'm like, I feel fine. What's going on? And it was just 7 days. It was just a span of 7 days. My skin took much longer to heal, which it does. But at least in terms of my joint health, it was so fast. And that was a really big motivation for me to continue. And ever since I've been plant based, I haven't looked back. It was just 7 days, but then it's just been that way. And I don't miss anything. I continue to eat food the way I used to. I think diversity is only increased in terms of my nutrition
Mm.
intake. But health was a huge reason. Everything else came later for me.
How long have you been vegan now?
I think it was 25, and I'm 35 now, so 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
long time.
That's
But it
awesome.
was it was at a time when we did not have access to a lot of things in
Yeah.
India. I don't think tofu was as easily available. Forget tempeh and seitan, and we didn't have all that. But it was still not hard because you go out and you still have like idli and sambar, and many things are just vegan by itself. So we don't think about it because people think it's going to be so hard and you're going to give up so many things. But
Mm.
our traditional cuisine is very vegan friendly.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, Roshni, as an award winning nutritionist, why do you suggest people should follow a vegan diet?
Plant-based diets. So I think as a nutritionist, I get to see clients a lot more than doctors would get to see them. So when you go to a doctor's visit, you're probably not going to see the doctor for another few months. But if you sign up for a nutrition program, you're connecting on an almost weekly basis for a span of 3 to 6 months. So you're getting to see people much, much more often. When we look at nutrition, if sustainability cannot be achieved, you're not going to make a change. You're not going to
Mm.
make a lifestyle change, and you'll
Mm.
bounce back to your older habits. Plant-based diets, because it's so rich in fiber and resistant starch, the few food groups that do not convert to body fat, but have so many benefits in terms of preventing chronic diseases, that you can eat much more and you can eat without having to count your calories, without having to worry too much about your quantities, and you still see results with regard to better health, better weight, better disease management. I think sustainability becomes easy. And when sustainability becomes easy, people are more likely to follow it for a longer period of time. So for me, when I'm recommending plant-based diet to people, it's not only that, of course, it is the best diet in terms of your overall health, but it's also easy to follow. It's not that eat only one cup of rice, eat only half a chapati, you can eat meat, but only this much. No, there's no restriction in terms of how much you're eating, and people also do realize it's more inclusive.
Mm.
The first thought when you think about going plant-based is it's going to be restrictive, but it's not. You actually start discovering that you eat so much more and so much more variety than any other form of diet.
Mm. So, I've seen a number of nutritionists online who say that being vegan, being plant based is propaganda, and you do not get all the required nutrients on a vegan diet. What do you have to say to that?
Your vitamins and minerals, which is your micronutrients, are concentrated in plants, not in animal sources. So let's say I'm taking a slab of meat versus a cup of berries. You're going to get much more antioxidants, phytonutrients, everything that heals your body, fixes you, everything that helps you prevent chronic diseases, which is anti-carcinogenic, which is anti-inflammation, is there in the cup of berries. It's not there in a slab of meat. So the micronutrient concentration in terms of weight is concentrated. Leafy green vegetables are probably highest when it comes to weight versus the amount of nutrients you're getting in, or calories versus nutrients you're getting in. So it's very, very concentrated. So it's wrong to say that plants don't have nutrients, or you're going to get less nutrients when it comes to plants. In fact, even protein, which is one of the most argued topics. Um, so when we think of protein, we think of meat, right? Meat and eggs and dairy. And when we think of plant-based proteins, a hierarchy is pulses is on top. So your legumes and pulses is on top. Your whole grains are second. Then you have vegetables. Then you have fruits. So that's the hierarchy people have in mind. So let's say someone is vegan and wants to get enough protein. You eat a lot of pulses or whole grains, vegetables not so much, and then fruits not so much.
Mm.
That's the hierarchy. But let's say that I go on a broccoli only diet. So let's say that all I'm eating throughout the day is only broccoli, which is very low in the hierarchy of proteins. But I'm getting about 2000 calories worth of broccoli per day, which is my daily food intake. I'm still getting over 120 grams of proteins. And that's with only broccoli. And my palate is going to include a lot of legumes and pulses and everything else.
Mm.
So as long as you're eating enough calories, of course, malnourishment is a different thing. Malnourishment, you're not getting enough proteins, but you're also not getting vitamins and minerals. You're not getting enough of anything. But as long as you're eating the required calories for the day, you're getting more than enough, even if you eat just one vegetable throughout the day. And we don't. We eat a lot of whole grains and legumes and pulses.
Mm.
So plant-based food generally is very rich in micronutrients, and you get more than enough, especially in a very privileged society that we live in currently, where there's an abundance of food. At least what people watching this podcast have access to.
Mm.
You are getting more than enough food calories, and you are getting more than enough nutrients.
So why do these nutritionists say it's propaganda then?
I
Like,
think
why is there so much disparity in the medical community?
one thing is, when I study nutrition, I've done my diploma in plant-based nutrition. So I've also specifically studied the niche. But when you overall study nutrition, you d- our textbooks are not up to date with the science. Yeah.
Mm.
So when you go back at what's happening now, what is research showing right now, it's gonna take 10 years for that to reflect in your textbooks. It's gonna take some time. So one thing is people who don't continuously upgrade themselves with knowledge with current times. Um, you're not seeing what really is. That is one. And number two is also that when we are looking at like an egg, and people say that an egg is the most wholesome because it has all the nutrients, you're not looking at the other things. So it's like saying that my urine is rich in a certain vitamin. Let's say vitamin C. I don't know if it is, but let's say my urine is rich in vitamin C, so I should start my day with a glass of urine every
Some
morning.
people do.
But that's crazy. But that's crazy. If you want a certain vitamin, get it from the richest source. You're not going to get it from the poorest source of that particular vitamin.
Yeah.
So especially with eggs, are you getting the nutrients? Yes, you're probably getting the nutrients, but you're also getting something called choline. And choline is a specific nutrient that produces trimethylene oxide, TMAO, in the gut, which is very, very bad for your gut health. It's very, very inflammatory. So when I'm looking at getting my nutrients, I'm also making sure that I'm getting antioxidants and phytonutrients, and I'm getting all the other things which are also protective for my body. I'm not looking at that one individual ingredient by
Mm.
itself.
So, speaking of eggs, there's so much I want to discuss here. If somebody wants to replace eating eggs in the morning, if let's say they are their doctor has told them, you know,
Yeah.
you need to have an egg in the
Hmm.
morning, what is a good replacement for eggs
Yeah.
with the same level of protein
Yeah.
and a rich source of nutrients?
I think when people talk about replacing a particular thing, especially when I'm working with clients, I do want to understand, are you trying to replace it from a taste perspective, or are you
Mm.
trying to replace it from a nutrition perspective? Most likely people are trying to replace it from a taste. I like the taste of this, and that's
Mm.
why. And if or convenience, sometimes it is convenient. I'm trying to replace it from a convenience perspective. I don't know what else to cook, and this is fast, and I'm just going to make this. Um, this is a healthier option compared to like a cereal and milk, and I'm going to make this. So I think education is very important from that perspective. That's why don't take everything your doctor says. I'm not educated to talk from a medical perspective. I don't have the right to talk from a medical perspective. So let's say that I have a client for diabetes management, and we start seeing the fasting glucose go down and the HbA1c levels go down. Even though I'm seeing the results, I cannot tell the client drop your medication or
Mm.
reduce your medication. That's what a doctor should be doing. Likewise, I don't think doctors should talk about nutrition, because that's not their expertise. We've been studying this much more, and we work with clients a little bit more closely in terms of helping people see what is sustainable, what is not sustainable. Um, but let's say purely from a protein perspective, if you're trying to replace eggs, you can get adequate amount of proteins from legumes, pulses, and even tofu. You don't have to eat tofu if you don't want to, but I think it's a fantastic source of protein, calcium, so many nutrients, isoflavones, thing which protects you against cancers. But let's say that tofu is not accessible where you are; it's not available. Then I think soybeans are great. Soybeans are dry beans, just like kidney beans. You get them for relatively cheaper price than any it's just like a bean, and you can get it in bulk, and because it's dry, it stores for 6 months, 8 months. I haven't tried to do it anytime longer because we finish up our sources, but it
Mm,
stores very well.
mm,
So get a big, supply of soybeans, and whatever you're having, your traditional breakfast, add a cup of legumes on the side,
mm.
and you're going to get your protein, and you're going to get, besides the proteins, pulses have a fantastic quality. um, we call it the second meal effect. So everything, in terms of chronic diseases and obesity, is the fluctuation of insulin in your body, and fluctuation of how, when I'm eating certain food, is that food converted to temporary stores, we
Mm,
call it glycogen, or is it converted to body fat? And what that food is converted into depends on my insulin.
mm.
Okay. So let's say I'm having a bowl of pulses for morning for my breakfast, and then I eat an ice cream, which is fat and sugar, for lunch, my spike in insulin will still be lower because of the pulses I had in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Versus if I, yeah, yeah. So versus if I had a meal without the pulses. So it's called the second meal effect. Pulses continue to stabilize your blood sugar levels for meals much later,
Mm,
than when you've just had it. Versus the same thing, if I had a bowl of pulses with rice in the morning or only rice,
mm.
my blood sugar spike, even though the calorie intake is more with pulses and rice, would be much more stable. Yeah, so
Wow.
that's interesting. Eggs don't do that. Yeah. So you're looking at food more holistically than just an individual component of the food, like only protein or, any one nutrient.
Mm.
Yeah.
I see a lot of reels online where people are taking dal as a protein source and comparing it to chicken and saying that dal has so much more carbohydrates and you have to have like 25 bowls of dal to get the same amount of whatever that you would get from a chicken.
Yeah.
So, how do you respond to that as a nutritionist?
Yeah. It's an unfair comparison, from first of all, because you're not looking at protein alone, you're looking at everything else. I'll give you an example when it comes to especially plant protein. Um, Plant proteins are, or rather, pulses and lentils are what we refer to as resistant starches, and resistant starches are what we refer to as prebiotic fiber. Prebiotic fibers are food for the good gut microbiome. Okay, so when we are eating resistant starches, lentils and pulses, your good gut microbiome are very, very happy because they feed on the prebiotic fibers and release something called short chain fatty acids.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the more the short chain fatty acids in your gut, the more you are in terms of longevity, in terms of disease prevention, in terms of your waist to hip ratio being easier to maintain. So even if I'm overeating, I tend to not gain weight. In terms of every aspect of life. So the more short chain fatty acids you are, the better your gut health. The better your gut health, autoimmune disease prevention and chronic disease prevention, everything is better. Yeah, that only happens with plant-based proteins, not plant-based proteins rather, but resistant starches which are found in plant-based foods. Um, but you're not getting the same thing with chicken. So, like I mentioned, if you're looking at food for that individual ingredient, this has protein, this doesn't have protein. It's an unfair comparison, like having urine for a particular ingredient. Yes, it does have, but it's not the best source. You want to find the source which is also protective. So, I think it's like saying that dals are very, very rich in phytonutrients, and chicken has zero phytonutrients. And if I were to get my phytonutrients from chicken, I would have to have this much of chicken. No, that's not a fair comparison because chicken doesn't have any phytonutrients. It's a plant property, it's only found in plants. Um, Look at food more holistically. And I think we also have a very skewed idea about how much protein does the body require. Um, Excess proteins, one, is converted to body fat, so it also can lead to weight gain if you're not utilizing it. And second thing, excess protein is excess load on the kidneys. It puts you at the risk of kidney diseases. It's not necessarily always healthy for you. Excess protein is also linked with lower longevity. You don't live as long. People or tribes which live the longest eat anywhere between zero point 0.8 and 1 gram protein per kilogram of body weight.
Mm,
And here we are trying to reach 2 3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which is very, very high. So that's not good. Here, the argument I get from people most of the time is, but I also exercise and I should be eating more protein if I exercise. I think athletes exercise 4 to 5 hours a day. The leisurely going to the gym, scrolling your phone once in a while, lifting, coming back, which most people do. They don't think,
mm,
which most
mm,
people
mm,
do.
mm.
you still only require zero point 0.8 to 1 gram. But let's say I'm very religiously training and I'm building my muscle mass, 1.2 gram, 1.4 gram, but that's still not a lot of proteins, when compared to. So I think the comparison of this only has protein and this has proteins and carbohydrates. Well, why do you think carbohydrates are bad? Yeah, that's the
Yeah, I guess
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
the everyone I speak to suggests that carbohydrates are bad.
yeah,
And it's everyone's talked about it so much that I genuinely like so
exactly.
many people genuinely believe like, oh, it's a bad thing and protein's a good thing
Yeah.
and carbs are a bad thing.
Yeah, I think carbohydrates are subdivided into three separate categories. You have sugar, you have resistant starches, you have fiber. Sugar is bad. Table sugar is bad. So if I'm having sugary carbohydrates, I should not be having that. And that is the white bread and the rice and table sugar, etc. The resistant starches and fiber. Fiber specifically, one is lower in calories than sugar is. Sugar is 4 calories for every gram. Fiber is 1 to 3 calories for every gram, and fiber is the only food group which does not convert to body fat.
Wow.
So let's say I'm having like ridiculous amount of fiber per day, I'm just going to have great bowel movements. It's not going to convert to body fat. Yeah. So
Mm.
high resistance starches and high fiber diets actually better longevity and better weight control and better gut health, better autoimmune disease prevention, better chronic disease prevention. High sugar diet not so good for you. It's
Mm.
not the best for you. So I think when we are looking at carbohydrates, we want to distinguish that don't have sugars, but have as much fiber and as much resistant starches as you can. And where do you find them? Whole grains, pulses, vegetables, fruits, all of these.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Interesting that you talk about fiber. So we just did a podcast with a carnivore diet person, okay,
interesting.
who
I
was
want to see
very
that. Wow.
he's very adamant that the human body doesn't require fiber at all. Now, I'm curious about this because I mean, carnivore people that are only eating like if you are only eating meat
Yeah.
24/7, eventually I'm I just don't understand how that's something that you can sustain for more than like a year, maybe at best. Our bodies are very
Yeah.
adaptable, I feel. But after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years,
Yeah.
we're not, from my understanding, we are not designed as carnivores. We are more biologically geared towards being herbivorous. So if someone is eating so much meat all the time, how can they be healthy?
I don't think they are healthy. I don't, and their blood reports don't show that they are healthy either. And I also, it goes against everything what science says. Science says high fiber diet. I think that's one thing almost all doctors and nutritionists predominantly believe in. A high fiber diet is important. Even people who are omnivores promoters from a scientific perspective also believe we want to have high fiber diet. And for someone who makes meal plans, so I'm calculating the fiber. It's fiber is only found in plants. You don't have, like, cholesterol is almost exclusively to animals. Like, that's exclusively you're not going to find in plants. Fiber is only found in plants. You won't have any fiber in animals. So someone who's eating only meat and absolutely no vegetables or leafy greens, you're not getting any fiber. Our per day fiber intake should be anywhere between 25 and 35 grams. With my clients, we take it up to 50 grams because we are working on disease reversal and disease prevention and getting your disease in remission. So we are looking at a very, very high fiber diet. And it's not possible to reach that unless you're eating a very plant forward diet with 80% of the food going in to be plants. So
Mm.
all of us have a rough estimate calorie intake of 2000 calories per day. Yeah. And if you're filling those calories with a lot of junk food, including meat, you don't have the space to eat the healthy food. And if you don't have the
Mm.
space to eat the healthy food, you're not going to get your 50 grams of fiber. So it's important to reach
Right.
the number. And for us to be able to reach that number, you want to be plant forward. I think a lot of people, we've seen this in the past. Many carnivore influencers. There was this thing about the Liver King recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see this very often that people come in and you don't know what they're doing. Like, you
Yeah.
really don't know what they're doing when they go back home. You don't know what they're eating when they go back home. And we've also seen a lot of carnivore influencers online continuously changing their statement and then showing their blood work and saying, yes, the cholesterol is high, but that's okay. How is that okay when everything in science, the literature is pointing towards high LDL, high cholesterol leading to heart diseases? and your reports show you have high cholesterol, and you say that's okay. That's not okay. So I don't think
Hmm.
it's it's against what science says.
I think the interesting point for me here is people on a carnivore diet say they feel so healthy and they feel full of energy, they feel so good, their skin has cleared up, they feel amazing,
Yeah,
and they use that current status of how they're feeling as a
exactly.
benchmark for the carnivore diet is healthy.
Exactly. Yeah,
But from what I understand, they've just taken fiber out of their diet, so it's changing how their gut is feeling, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And so
They're
it's
probably
just
not going to the bathroom also more than once in a week.
yeah,
And that's not a sign of
yeah,
health. You want to have a daily bowel movement, and that's not healthy.
yeah.
But you're right. It's comparing was how you're feeling right now versus what's really happening internally. Yeah.
Mm. That's what I find interesting is the long-term effects because that has not been studied because this carnivore thing is quite new
Yeah.
and people have only started doing it like now.
Yeah.
But when we look at the data of peer-reviewed research
Yeah.
around a plant-based diet, we know that it's suited to the human body on a long-term basis for
Yeah.
ultimate optimum performance for the human
Absolutely.
body.
Yeah.
Like that data is there, but the data is not there for a carnivore diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I was recently in a podcast with Sri Ravi Shankar,
I'm so excited
Gurudev,
to see that. I'm
and
really excited to see that.
yeah, me too. It was an amazing experience. And I asked him about plant-based diet, a vegan diet, and Gurudev said that you can only get B12 from, like, as a vegetarian, you could only get B12 from uh, uh, curd, from yogurt.
Mm,
I want to understand from a nutritionist perspective, firstly, is this correct?
mm.
And where can a vegan get B12 from
Yeah.
that's not from an animal source?
Yeah. B12 is a now generation problem. It's not a vegan or non-vegan problem. It's really a now generation problem. And I say this because B12 is found actually in the soil. It's not found in animals or plants or anything. It's found in the soil. And when animals graze on the soil, they're getting some B12 going into their intestines. And when you're cutting and eating that, you're getting a little bit of B12. But the ideal source of B12 would be soil exposure. So we would do a lot of gardening before, we would do barefoot walking, we would play outside. We don't do that anymore.
Mm,
And especially post the recent pandemic, everyone's more indoors and more closed than ever before. We would also get, I remember I went strawberry picking about 10, 12 years back. It was a road trip we did, and we stopped at this farm where we were doing strawberry picking, and we had this huge bunch of strawberries, and we go up to the person who owned the farm, and we are like, where do we wash them, because we want to eat them. And he just looked at us strangely, why would you wash them? You just there's no pesticide, there's no herbicide, you can just eat them, and it's fine. And that's how we used to be, so if you talk to your parents, they wouldn't overly wash their vegetables or fruits. So if
yeah.
something is coming in, they would just pick up and eat, and you get your B12 from there because there's a little bit of soil exposure there. um when we were kids, we used to play outdoors, and we were
Mm,
encouraged to play outdoors. So there was soil exposure. So we were getting B12. Um, it's so hard for me to tell people that it's go expose yourself to soil and don't worry about vigorously washing later.
yeah.
It's okay. It's okay if there's a little bit of mud on you, and it's okay. And we are in a hyper sanitized world. Water supply is also hyper sanitized. So we're not getting the B12 from the water either. And because we don't have that soil exposure, B12 is a now generation problem.
That's very interesting because I know for a fact that in the US, something like 40% of meat eaters are low in B12 as
Oh,
well. So when
same
we give
here.
this argument
Yeah,
कि meat se B12 मिलता है या animal products se B12 मिलता है, I don't think that that's, as you say,
not
accurate
yeah.
because the animals are getting it from, as you say,
Yes.
the soil.
Yeah.
So I remember, like, I've been vegan now 21 years or whatever, and when for like the first 10, 15 years I was living in Australia, and we would always go to the organic markets to get
Mm.
all of our vegetables all the time. And we would
Yeah.
never wash them. Like
Yeah.
it was literally picked and we would eat.
Yes.
And we would spend a lot of, like, Australia's a little bit different in terms of where we were living. Like it was very outdoors, very, natural, I guess.
And you didn't
I've
have to
never
worry
had a
about
B12
B12
deficiency and I had never
deficiency.
had a
Exactly.
supplement also. I didn't need
Yeah.
it. And my B12 was always exceptionally high, and I was always so fascinated by this, that why is my B12 so
Yeah.
high? And but then I realized as I learned from the fact that B12, is a bacteria in soil, that that is why my B12 has been so high.
Yeah.
It's only now in the last few years living in India that I've had to start taking B12 supplements,
Yeah.
because I do have to wash my I mean, I just order from Blinkit, or my maid gets from where,
Exactly.
like, nothing
Yeah.
is like organic, so I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
getting. And so the environment is different now.
Yeah.
It's
Especially in metro cities,
yeah,
we have zero exposure.
yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
let's say you're living like in a Goa or one of the coastal areas, you have some
Yeah,
exposure. You're going to the beach once in a while.
yeah,
Um, Iodine is also a now generation problem,
right.
besides B12, because iodine used to be rich in the soil.
Mm,
Our soil was rich in iodine, but with our irrigation practices, soil erosions, we are not getting, and that's with a lot of the nutrients we are not getting enough of. Even more reason to eat more plants,
yeah,
because you
yeah,
need more of it now. So
yeah.
even more reason. But when it comes to vegans and B12, again, where are you staying, and do you really need it? And
Mm,
supplement it. It's a fairly inexpensive supplement.
mm,
It's
mm.
also not something you have to do it on a daily basis.
Okay.
Taking a 500 mcg once or twice in a week is more than enough, and have a few days and keep it in your countertop so you don't forget about it.
Mm,
Um, it is important, so don't take it for granted. Do
yeah,
supplement it.
yeah.
Especially B12, D3, and this is not vegans, non-vegans, everyone
Everybody.
generally supplement it.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
So, how does a plant-based diet help to reverse something like diabetes?
Diabetes is very interesting. Diabetes is Our understanding of diabetes is sugar, especially in India, because I get a lot of patients come to me and say that I've stopped adding sugar to my tea and my sugar levels are still high, and I've stopped doing this and I've
Mm,
stopped eating sugars and my sugar levels are still high. I don't eat desserts, sugar levels are still high. And I'm like, okay, so what are you eating? When they run me through their diet, and there's like 6 spoons of ghee through the day, and there's a lot of fat intake and deep fried foods, and we sort of just have an understanding that if you have diabetes, it's okay to eat deep fried chips, but don't eat sugar. So that's the understanding we have of diabetes. And that's a partial story. When you're looking at diabetes reversal, which is different from diabetes management, diabetes is a sugar intolerant disease or carbohydrate intolerant disease. So let's say I'm eating something which has sugar, my body's ability to store that sugar as energy is going down. And that's what diabetes is. My cells require sugar to function, my organs, everything. If I'm breathing, if I'm moving, that requires sugar. And I'm eating sugar, but my body is not able to take that sugar and provide the energy. So that's what diabetes is. And this is happening not because insulin is the hormone which is required in terms of storing glucose into glycogen. And in type 2 diabetes, your body is making enough insulin too, so you also have the raw material in terms of storing sugar. But with type 2 diabetes, it's linked to something called intramyocellular fat, IMF, or a layer of fat around your muscle cells,
mm,
which is not letting insulin do its job.
mm.
But if you're looking at diabetes reversal, it's about getting rid of that layer of fat called the intramyocellular fat. And once you get rid of that layer of fat, insulin starts doing its job well. Yeah. So it's really about how can you get rid of that layer of fat. And there's only two things. Number one, fiber. Fiber acts as a cleaning agent. Plant-based foods are richest in fiber. And here's where I'm telling we need to take to 50 grams of fiber per day, really high fiber diet. Number two, stop eating foods which contribute to that layer of fat, predominantly saturated fats concentrated in meat, dairy, and eggs.
Wow.
Yeah,
So that's what I was really curious about, is like, let's say someone is a vegetarian in India
yeah,
and they have diabetes, but they are eating dairy, they're having milk, they're having ghee, they're having butter,
yeah.
then that is contributing to
Very
diabetes.
strongly contributing. And I think people get very, very offended also because sometimes ghee is generally Ayurveda and recommended in Ayurveda. Misunderstood science, very misunderstood. Ayurveda does not recommend ghee, especially in the amounts we are having right now, and also the quality of ghee which we are having right now. The little bit of ghee which was recommended from an Ayurvedic perspective was the ghee which was churned and made
Right.
long before. We don't churn, ghee anymore. We are boiling literally the cream to a point where you have the charring down. It's very high in something called AGs, advanced glycation end products. Not good for you. But it was very small part of Ayurveda, and I think Ayurveda has so much beautiful things to offer. People just ignore all of that and just want to talk about the intake of ghee. So with a lot of vegetarians I see who are struggling with diabetes, though they are not eating meat and dairy, they are meat and eggs, they are eating a lot of ghee, they are eating a lot of paneer in the name of health. And if you look at the composition of paneer, very, very high saturated fats, very high. And milk is rich in it's cholesterol. So you should not, cheese is cholesterol. You should not be eating that because that's just making that layer of intramyocellular fat even more thicker and even more resistant. And yes, temporarily you will not see your sugar levels rise, but on a long term run, reversal will be even more harder.
Mm. So, would you say that it's better for someone to have, let's say somebody wanted to replace paneer with tofu, is that a better replacement for paneer?
Alternative, yes, tofu is definitely a better alternative. Look at your source of tofu, and I think in most metro cities, at least in India, you have very good quality tofu. You also in I think most metro cities also have a lot of small vendors and home vendors who supply tofu, which is good, great quality tofu. Some brands don't do a good job because if you look at the ingredients, you see a lot of additive substances which you don't want.
Mm,
But tofu is 100% a much better alternative than cottage cheese would be or paneer would be, because it is lower in saturated fats. It has great amount of proteins, and it's very versatile. Just like paneer takes up the flavor of whatever you cook it in. So
mm,
paneer by itself doesn't have any flavor. You're
mm,
going to cook it in spices and give the flavor, right? The same thing with tofu. It doesn't have any flavor of its own. Um, in fact, at home, the family is 90% plant based, except for my dad. So all of us are plant based except for my dad. And he's anti vegan. So if something is vegan, he doesn't want to touch it. But let's say we make like a, a, a tofu curry and we pass it off as paneer, he'll eat it and he has no idea what he's eating.
That happens so often. Like I
Yeah.
had a palak paneer and they used tofu instead
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
paneer. Could not even tell the
You
difference
cannot
because the
tell the difference.
consistency. See, there's different types of tofu. I think people
Yeah.
try like a soft tofu or like a medium
Exactly.
tofu or a
Yeah.
firm tofu, and different brands se thoda alag alag taste
Exactly.
bhi hai, right?
Yeah.
And you can get tofu that has a very similar consistency to paneer in
Yeah.
terms of like its composition.
Exactly.
And then when you use it in a palak paneer,
You
you
cannot tell the
cannot
difference.
tell the
Yeah.
difference taste wise.
Yeah.
And that's so true that the protein content is there. It has no cholesterol.
And
It is a
calcium, rich
much
in
and
calcium also. Yeah.
calcium.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think it's just a much better option
Yeah.
overall for people to have. And I'm not sure about the cost difference of tofu versus paneer in India.
Yeah.
I've not seen
Yeah.
that, but I've seen tofu is available
Yeah.
everywhere.
I think the local, that's what I was saying. The most metro cities have
Huh. Huh.
home chefs. They make tofu,
Huh.
which is cheaper than paneer
Yeah.
because tofu production wise is not expensive.
Mm.
The soybeans to tofu, the production wise is not expensive.
Yeah.
Paneer is even more expensive. If you actually make, I mean, of course,
Huh.
there's so much of adulteration in milk, so you can make it cheaper, but
It's
paneer
like all
is,
these fake
and fake
paneers.
paneers,
Yeah.
exactly. But otherwise, paneer is expensive.
Yeah.
Tofu production wise is not expensive, but demand in the market is still going up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people are just starting to, obviously, with more demand, there are going to be more brands make it at a much cheaper cost. Um, but I know at least in Bangalore, a few years back, we used to get it from this Asian restaurant, and there was this lady, old lady, who would make like big batches at home, and she would send in kilos, like 5 kilos and
Oh
10
my
kilos. Yeah,
God.
yeah, and relatively cheap. So sometimes when, because it would come from a different part of Bangalore to us, from to our home, the delivery cost used to be more than just the cost of the tofu, and she
Wow.
was so passionate about it and just would make and serve. So you can find a few, only if the cost is a problem. But otherwise, even the ones you find it on Blinkit and Swiggy, it's not as, I don't think you should compare the cost in terms of your health and health parameters versus a few extra rupees for tofu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's how I think about things like soy milk. It's like I understand there's a cost difference between, let's say, regular cow milk from Amul
Yeah.
and soy milk, but you have to look at the differences between the health benefits long term.
Yeah.
Do you want to pay lakhs of rupees when you go to the hospital when you're 50 because you have heart disease or some cardiac problem,
Yeah.
which you can avoid if you avoid animal protein to begin with?
Yeah.
So I do think you have to look at your body and health more
Yeah.
holistically.
And I think people get so stuck up on, let's say, like a soy milk brand, it
Mm.
requires you to have the ingredients behind, right? So
Huh.
let's say you're having like 98% soybeans and 2% like oligosaccharides or something, you write it down. And people say this shouldn't be in your milk. And I'm like, have you ever looked behind a milk, like a cow's milk? Cow's milk doesn't require you to write the number of hormones which were injected into the cow, the antibiotics which were injected to the cow, the adulteration which was done. It's just a packet of cow's milk because there's no requirement to write what is going on. But it's so much worse than the 2% you're getting from a soy milk, which might have like a stabilizer or something. So I think that is also, but what we've come up at home, and I think if you have a lot of plant-based family members who regularly have vegan milk at home, um, you get these soup makers. We have one from, I'm forgetting the brand name, but every brand has it. So you have these soup makers, which is a device,
Mm,
and we make our plant milk in the soup maker. So let's say we soak you can literally come up with your own combinations.
mm.
At home, we currently love an oats and almond combination.
Oh,
So
wow.
we would
Okay.
soak the oats and almond in the night, and then you put it in the soup maker, and it gives this really frothy, amazing. In 20 minutes, you have plant milk ready, and you just strain it, and it stores in a fridge for like 4 or 5 days,
Wow.
and you make your chai, coffee with it. And the soup maker is also relatively inexpensive, and making it at home is so much cheaper if the cost is the only problem.
Yeah, and
Um,
then you can see what you're making as well. I love
exactly.
that. My
Yeah.
trainer was telling me that he makes milk or made milk from sesame seeds
Yes.
because he was in
Yeah.
recovery and he needed excess
Yeah.
amounts of like a lot of calcium, right, for
Calcium.
his
Yeah.
bone recovery.
That's
So he would
amazing.
soak it with
Yeah.
sesames with water and then just add dates.
Yes.
And this milk was so dense in calcium. It was like 10 times more calcium than cow's
Exactly.
milk or something insane because
Yeah.
sesame seeds are really high in calcium. And I was like, wow, I've actually never heard of sesame seed
Yeah. Yeah.
milk, but of course it's high in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
calcium, as we
Calcium.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just getting something like this as a permanent solution if you're averse to getting milk from outside.
Yeah.
Um, And I think now brands are getting smarter with regard to making plant-based milk more commercially available,
Yeah.
and also starting to reduce the price and play around with the ingredients. And you have some fantastic. I saw millet milk and I was so fascinated by it.
Yes,
It was
millet
so
milk.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing. And that's India's, grain.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah. Very inexpensive to make at home too.
yeah.
And
Oh, is it? Okay.
yeah, it is very inexpensive. And also, I think all of us, when we are comparing veganism being expensive, you're only looking at dairy alternatives being more expensive. But as an overall diet, veganism is so much more cheaper than any other form of nutrition because it's literally vegetables and fruits and whole grains and pulses.
But straight away when we start talking about veganism, people will say that being vegan is expensive because of avocados and almonds.
But that's ridiculous because that's not the only food we are eating. It's so much cheaper compared to any other form of diet. It's not expensive. Yeah. And I think even when because I've traveled the world being a vegan, unless you go to a really fancy vegan restaurant of that particular town to try a particular vegan dish, which is going to be expensive because it's niche, right? As long as you're going to a regular restaurant, I've never had a problem ordering vegan food. They are more than willing to customize, and many times the menu itself has a lot of vegan
Mm,
options. And I'm not talking about eating French fries and salads. I literally mean like a proper meal, and it's always cheaper than most of the other dishes, which is like a meat heavy,
mm,
because the produce is cheap. It's not expensive.
mm.
Yeah.
I just find that argument so stupid. It's like, well, then what is a meat eater? That's like, are they not going to like an expensive steakhouse to have like?
Absolutely.
It's just such a
Exactly.
stupid argument. I don't know what
Yeah.
to say.
I think it's also fear, no?
Yeah,
Because I think generally it's a lot to do with your mind.
yeah,
Now I didn't tell myself I'll go vegan for the rest of my life when I
yeah,
started my journey.
yeah.
I told myself 7 days because of so much fear. You're constantly hearing social signals, people saying. I remember for years after I transitioned to a vegan diet, the smallest of thing happening to me, like my little toe got fever, and my mom was like, "It's because of your diet." Because
Huh.
everyone's just so in tune to the belief that if you don't drink milk, this is going to happen and this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And anything which would happen to me, parents were like, it's because of your nutrition, you're not eating well and you're not eating milk. And I think there's that fear from that perspective. I've had clients many times in the past where we give them a nutrition plan and then their doctors are putting a lot of pressure that you're not having milk and that's not good for you, and the bone health and this and that, without knowledge. And Every single time I tell them that, can I get on a call with your doctor? Can I please share some resources? And many a times I've shared and there's no reply. There's absolutely no counter. Get on a call with me, have an argument with, tell me where I'm wrong. I would correct myself if I'm wrong. But you're telling something based on signaling, based on messages which you're hearing, and that's not fair and that's not right. So I think there's that fear. If we can start just working around that and saying that, or even sometimes that, let's say someone transitions to a vegan diet and
Mm.
they go out and eat something which is non-vegan and then they're feeling guilty about it. You don't have to, it's okay. It's a learning process, and they're going to be up, they're going to be, but it's, everything is a learning process, and it's okay to start where you are right now. Can you make your next meal vegan? And then you start realizing it's easier than you think about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. So I wanted to do a response to this Tehseen guy that basically, I've got it here, this
Yeah.
video. Um, I think I shared it with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tried to reach out to him to see if he'll like reply to us, but I don't
Did
think
he?
he wants to. I don't think he saw my message.
Okay.
So, okay, hang on, I'll just play it once. Hang on.
India is the only country in the world where the average height hasn't gone up. This insistence on vegetarianism, this actual moral policing on vegetarianism is causing us dearly. And we have children who are skidding, who are not tall, who are malnourished. And that's a serious issue. Very often on TV, when I bring this up with the BJP, and I say this with the BJP because
So he's
We won't get
basic.
into the BJP.
Well, that's why I
So
stopped at
sorry.
BJP. I'm like, we're not going to get into a political
Yeah.
conversation. So in our recent podcast with Masala Labs as well, he said the same thing, that a lack of animal protein is causing children to be stunted. What is this? What is your reply to this?
Well, there's no research saying that. First of all, don't put up pictures of malnourished kids, and then it's it's not the same when you're working with kids who have limited resources. That's how even meat came into origin. Coastal areas which had abundance of seafood and did not have enough of plantation, or Middle Eastern places which did not have enough of export and import, and whatever was grown there, people were eating that. We are in a hyper connected world now. We are not living in um, so let's say I'm working with kids in a village which is not connected and they have limited resources. We will work with the resources. Now this is from someone who's definitely privileged and living in a society where you have abundance of resources. There's no argument, first of all, with regard to nutrition intake. Second thing is, what about places, Asian places like Japan and China, where people are short and eating a lot of meat? What are you even comparing? I think genetics, height is genetically determined, and also a lot of, if you're into impact sport when you're younger, like basketball, anything which are jump ropes, things like that, that plays a small role. But it's unfair to say that people are short because they are vegetarians, and it's not true. Obviously, we all know people who are vegans and vegetarians, and who are normal. It depends on what your height of your parents is. It depends on what your height
That's
is
what
right
I
now.
thought, is
So
that
weird.
height is determined by genetics. As you said, it's not. What correlation is there between animal protein and height? Like
Exactly.
nothing.
Yeah, it's
I
nothing.
think that this guy is getting confused with the protein deficiency issue in India,
Yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah.
purely, as you said, an issue pertaining to lack of calorie intake.
Exactly.
Most of
Yeah,
India is in poverty.
yeah.
They're under the poverty line, so they're not eating enough to begin
Eating
with.
enough, and the people who are eating enough are eating a lot of hyper palatable food which is not nutritionally dense in general. So yes, the job of an expert is to spread the knowledge. I'm going to
Mm.
come out here and say, hey, don't eat that bag of chips, eat this instead, eat pulses, eat whole grains, which you should be. So there are a lot of people who are genuinely eating 2500, 3000 calories per day, but coming in from very bad quality hyper palatable food, not good for you.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's not the protein deficiency and height is really, I don't know of any study which shows that
Yeah.
protein deficiency linked to stunted growth. Calorie, overall calorie deficiency, yes. Malnourishment, yes. But this is different from people who are living in privileged society who have access to food. So that's unfair.
Yeah. So the issue is not animal protein versus plant protein. The issue is people having enough education around food and access to food to eat enough calories and have a wide variety of foods to have a whole foods plant-based diet. That
Absolutely.
is really what it's
Yeah.
about.
And shouldn't then the job be about spreading the right education?
That is the
That
thing.
should be
Like,
the thing, right?
what I find is that with people like this, like mansplainers like this, that do
Yeah.
these type of
Yeah.
videos, इतने confidence से बात करते हैं
Yeah.
कि वो कुछ भी कहें कि
Exactly.
सुसु पी लो,
Yeah.
लोग मानेंगे कि they'll be like, हाँ,
Yeah.
it's correct. Because of the way he says it, the confidence with which he
Exactly.
says it,
I
right?
agree with. Yeah.
So-
No, but that's what one of the things, points he mentioned, or I think I'm getting it right, was the school's not serving meat. Yeah. And
Mm,
the nutrient quality in this food the school is serving is not good. I agree with that. I'm not saying the schools are, but go back and then change that and try to make it perfect and try to and understand where the problem is happening. Maybe it's a because we have worked with underprivileged schools and many times it's a finance issue and lack of planning. There's no nutritionist on board to tell them what is right for the kids. But go and spread that education and you'll quickly learn that plant-based sources are cheaper, better in terms of growth, nutrition density. And also people tend to chubby kids are not necessarily healthy kids. And when we are looking at a normal child, I've had this from sometimes with parents
mm,
worried that their kid is not chubby enough compared to the rest of the class.
mm.
And is that a thing of concern because they're on a plant-based diet or a vegetarian diet?
That's seen as a pillar of health when you're fatter as a young
Exactly.
child.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm like, okay, what about menstruation? Well, most of the other girls in the class have reached menstruation at 8, 10 years old, 11 years old. And my child has not yet reached menstruation at 11, 12, 13
Mm,
years. That's healthy.
mm,
That's not a bad thing. So we are looking at we are not looking at, being obese as a sign of being healthy. Um, and plant-based nutrition is really the most nutritionally dense diet. Yes, we need to work around adequate amount of calories and that will take care of the protein. And yes, the calories from the right source. I'm not denying that. Yes, a lot of people in India are on a white rice and processed grains diet. Yes, they are. And we have to start changing that. But that's unfair to say that everyone in India is protein deficient and should start taking protein powder. No. Stop the processed grains, eat whole grains, eat legumes, pulses, eat healthier source of protein. Protein powders are not the answer.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Roshni. It's been so enlightening talking to you. And I feel like a breath of fresh air when I talk to nutritionists that are well read and stay informed in regards to the latest studies and latest information and want to be challenged to read the same. And we see so many doctors, nutritionists that I mean, firstly, doctors can't be brought into this conversation when it comes to nutrition because they're not um
It's
well
different.
versed
Yeah. Yeah.
in every doctor I
No, but
talk
a lot
to
of the
is
doctors
very
today are studying and starting to look into it. And I really
yeah,
appreciate that
they need
because
to.
they need to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know so many times when clients even they trust doctors now, and we
Yeah.
should be able to be in a empowered position to be able to give them answers, especially when you have people trusting you so much.
Mm,
And I'm starting to see that shift, which is beautiful.
yeah.
People are staying up to date with the science. And
Yeah.
anyone who's well read will promote a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so many doctors that I've been to, if it's anything, let's say I get a cold, right? Or I'm having hay fever or something.
Yeah.
I go to the doctor and they're like, it's probably because you're vegan, so you're weaker and your immune system is weak. Or, maybe you should consider adding some meat into your diet or something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
right? It's like they see meat and dairy as like an immediate solution to
Yeah.
any health problem, which logically makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so that's been my very poor experience with most doctors, I'm afraid. Um, and so I really do hope that the medical community, the nutrition and health community does stay more informed and wants to educate themselves
Yeah.
to, the latest peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, no, thanks to people like you doing such a good job. And one, providing platform for people to talk about and also giving people the right knowledge. It's easy to say. I know when I transitioned to a plant-based diet, there was no support around.
Mm,
I had to find my own support. I had to find people online. I,
yeah,
I remember even for a few weeks thinking I'm the only vegan in India because I don't think anyone is going to do this
right.
because there was no support system. And I think avenues like this is an opportunity for people to know that there's more than enough support. It's easier than you think.
Yeah,
And the changes, you can start making changes in smaller proportions without having to worry about your health.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.